Ah, so you are back. Besides the ones that come.
It's a typical country breakfast. Fried beets and sausage with garlic for a garnish. The innkeeper nods at you.
The werewolf threat has ended. Since you have found and rescued Igor, I have released our gypsy prisoner. It seems he was not a werewolf after all. All the peasant fears were for nothing.
You say hello to the Burgermeister.
You are a very polite person. Perhaps I should learn some manners from you for dealing with strangers.
You tell the Burgermeister about how much you want to be a hero.
I am beginning to think that you must be quite a hero already. The gypsy has no doubt returned home to his people. They have an encampment to the east. I will be able to get a real night's sleep for once. I do not have to worry that the prisoner will be harmed or that he will escape now. The people of this town will settle down again. They cried so loudly for blood because they are tired of living so long in the shadow of fear. There is a rumor that perhaps I was mistaken in trying to drive you away from Moldavia, that perhaps you are the hero you claim to be. But you know how rumors are. You cannot always trust what you hear. Take care.
Suppose you heard that the gypsy didn't kill Igor after all. Dmitri has set the gypsy free. No good will come of it. You mark my words. The man was clearly a werewolf. So, you haven't been eaten?
Tell Olga about what you've been doing in Moldavia.
And be sure and keep me informed. I need to know everything that goes on around here. Someone's got to have a clue after all. Now, what would you like to know about? Well, the gypsy may not have eaten the gravedigger, but that still doesn't explain why he was hanging around town. We'll all be eaten by that werewolf yet. Our Burgermeister is named Dmitri. He is responsible for keeping order in the town, and he is very serious. But there was some scandal about his grandmother, but it was hushed up. You see, there used to be a very active adventurers guild here in town, but it's been empty and locked up since I can remember. Dr. Cranium is a very strange man. No one knows what goes on in the back room of his house, except maybe Igor, and he won't talk about it. Someday, the mad doctor will blow us all up in one of those experiments of his. You mark my words. You take care. Don't want to see your funeral. You hate that walk to the cemetery. Yeah, good night, and don't let the bedbugs bite, as my husband used to say.
Your magical lasso floats towards the tree and plucks a single ripe fruit from its branches. You come, you, after, 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 After some rest, you feel better.
I just wanted to thank you for saving me. Not many people would try to help a gypsy. Particularly when everyone thinks that they are werewolves. Gypsies are not werewolves. You cannot believe the lies of the townsfolk. Visit our camp to the east sometime, and we will welcome you as only the gypsies can. Gypsies are not werewolves, but we are shape-changers. I hope to see you again sometime. Farewell!
You, 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 you. You hear movement on the other side of the door. After a few minutes, you hear someone removing the bar and unlocking the bolts on the other side of the door.
So Dmitri says the gypsy didn't really kill Igor after all. Then there's that one about the Easter bunny.
Wait, you didn't hear? Oh, that foolish gravedigger fell into a grave, and he was trapped by his own gravestone. He's dumber than a styrofoam cup.
Right. It's just lucky for Igor the stranger happened to wander by before he starved to death.
You are all fortunate that the stranger rescued Igor. He would have burned an innocent man. Well, I still think the gypsy's a werewolf. Say, did you hear that the gravedigger returned to town unharmed?
Did you know that the gypsy has been released?
Were you aware of the fact that rumor has it that you saved both Igor and the gypsy?
So you found Igor in the grave? Whew! Lucky for old Ig you came along.
Otherwise, poor little Iggy would be dead.
Well, at least he had a decent burial.
The gypsy has returned to his people, I guess. It is a good thing for him that you were in town. Now that Igor is back here with us, perhaps someday I will welcome him into the inn. He was always so strange, and no one had anything to do with him. I never imagined I would miss him before. It is a great relief to me that the gypsy has been released. I had not been looking forward to watching him burn at the stake. No man should die so hard. Well,
gypsy returned to his people, I suppose.
Yeah, that gypsy camp is somewhere to the east of town, by the shopping mall.
I still think the punk was a werewolf.
Did you ever see him turn into a wolf?
Well, no.
Did he have hairy hands and pointy ears like Leonard Nimoy?
Well, no.
You see, it's all your fault, blathering on about those stupid, foolish folk tales, while we could have harmed an innocent man.
Yeah, I knew all along there's no such thing as werewolves.
Well, Gravedigger returned to town safely, and he can get back to his job overcharging us for those fakakta gravestones.
Yeah, he's even got full medical and dental.
After all, the gravedigger was at work all the time, so to speak.
Well, things ought to settle back to abnormal now. What with our little buddy Igor returning and all.
Hip! We can go back to being open and friendly.
And as always, suspicious of strangers.
Tonight, for your dining pleasure, it is the traditional Moldavian chicken paprikash, delicately seasoned with locally grown paprika and garlic.
It was very kind of you to aid Igor. It has been a long time since we have had someone as heroic as you in Moldavia, yeah? Forgive us if we have seemed so unkind to you. It is just that we have lived so long in fear. I was very worried about the gypsy. It was just like those 3 old yentas to accuse the wrong man. I'm so glad the gypsy is free. I don't know if gypsies are werewolves, and I don't really care. As long as they don't harm anyone, they have as much right to live in Moldavia as we do.
Bella!
Don't you believe that, Yuri?
Maybe.
Well, when you see your gypsy friends again, you may tell him that Yuri and Bella will welcome him in town.
Now, I never said that.
Oh, but you meant it, didn't you? You are a man of your word, after all. Oh, that is right. We hadn't been properly introduced. Yuri, will you introduce us?
This is silly. You've met before.
Still, it would be nice to be properly introduced. Please, Yuri?
This is Bella Markarov, my wife and keeper of the kitchen.
You introduce yourself in return.
I am very honored to meet you. My husband Yuri doesn't like for me to talk to strangers. He thinks they may be dangerous. But clearly, you are not dangerous. You are a hero. We need a hero here.
Bella?
Oh, Yuri, I'm just saying how welcome he is in Moldavia. I always leave a supper out for him behind the inn. He looks strange and a little frightening, but I think he is really a good person. He's always so polite to me. I'm not sure what he means by graveyard humor, though. At least he seems to enjoy himself.
Everyone's too busy drinking to notice you. You unlock the door to your room and go in. You awaken as the sun begins to rise. The note reads, "Please meet me tonight outside the town gates. I will be waiting." It's signed, Your Friend Katrina.